Okay, I want you to do something for me, just for a second. Close your eyes. Picture a map of India, but not the one you know. Not with the neat state lines and highways.
No, this is different.
It's the year 1813.
Sure.
And you're standing somewhere in the middle of it all, maybe on the banks of the Narmada. And the air, it just feels heavy.
It's not just the humidity, it's tension, it's uncertainty.
Exactly. And if you look north towards the Himalayas, the mountains are practically rumbling. The Gurkhas are pushing their borders, they're expanding south, and they're starting to look at the rich plains of the Ganges Valley.
And then you turn your gaze to the center, to central India, and it's just, well, it's anarchy, absolute chaos. You've got these bands of horsemen, the Pindaris.
And these aren't an army in the traditional sense.
Not at all. They're like a force of nature. They sweep in, they raid villages, they burn crops, and then they just vanish back into the wilderness before any kind of organized force can even react.
And all this time, the great Maratha chiefs, the ones who are supposed to be the dominant power, they're watching. They're licking their wounds from past defeats. They're deeply suspicious of each other, and, they're secretly plotting. They're trying to figure out a way to finally kick the British out.
So for the British, this is a nightmare scenario. They're sitting there in Calcutta, and they're genuinely nervous. Their whole policy up to this point, this idea of a ring fence.
Right, just sort of hunkering down and defending what you already have.
Yeah, that policy is completely falling apart.
Yeah.
It's just not working anymore. The chaos is starting to spill over into their territories. They realize they need a different approach. They need a cleaner.
They need closer.
They need someone to come in and fundamentally change the game.
And that's when he arrives, Lord Hastings. And let's get this out of the way right at the top, because I know everyone listening is thinking it. This is not Warren Hastings.
Oh, we have to stress this. It's a classic exam trap. Different person, different time, totally different policy.
This is the man who walks into this mess in 1813, looks at the map, and decides it's time to stop playing defense. It's time to turn the British Empire in India into the British Empire of India.
It really is. It's such a cinematic moment in history. It's the pivot. It's the point where the East India Company finally sheds the last pretense of being just a trading company with a security force.
And becomes the paramount power.
The undisputed paramount power. And that's exactly what we are going to break down today.
Welcome back to the deep dive. I'm so excited for this one because this decade, 1813 to 1823, is just jam-packed with action, with intrigue, and frankly, with a ton of super specific exam-relevant details that often get glossed over.
They really do. People tend to jump from Wellesley to Dalhousie and miss this crucial consolidation phase.
But before we get into the wars and the treaties, we have some very important housekeeping to do. First off, a huge welcome to everyone listening to this Simplified UPSC by PPP-focused deep dive.
That's right. We're here to simplify the complex, to connect the dots for you. But honestly, we need your help to keep this whole thing going.
We really do. So here is our very humble request. If you're on YouTube right now, just pause for a second and hit that subscribe button. It makes a huge difference. And honestly, it helps with your own retention because you'll get the notification when the next part of the story drops.
And if you're in a position to do so, and we know not everyone is, but if you can, please think about supporting us on Patreon. It's what allows our team to dedicate the time to do this level of research and bring you this kind of super useful content.
And to our current supporters, a massive, heartfelt thank you. You are genuinely the backbone of this project. You make this possible.
We can't say that enough. Thank you.
Also, please get involved in the conversation. Like the video, and more importantly, share a valuable comment below. Let us know what clicked for you or ask a question. We read all of them.
And don't forget the resources. We've got free notes with practice PYQs, previous year questions waiting for you on our public Telegram channel. The link is in the description.
Oh, and the premium stuff, if you're really serious and want to take it to the next level.
The private library.
The private Telegram library. It's the treasure chest. You get access to all the videos in this series at once, organized premium notes, really detailed notes, extra PYQs, model mains answers, the works.
It's basically your entire toolkit. To get in, just send a DM on our public Telegram channel and we'll get you sorted.
Okay, business done. Let's get to the history.
Let's do it. So our mission today is a deep forensic analysis of Chapter 4 of the Tamil Nadu Class 12 history book, which covers Lord Hastings' tenure, 1813 to 1823.
We're hitting the big three wars, the Gurkha War, the Pindari campaigns, and the final Anglo-Maratha War. And then we'll pivot to the reforms, Ryotwari, judicial, education, the press.
And we're always looking at this through the exam lens. For anyone preparing, this period is an absolute goldmine. For prelims, you're looking at chronology questions, match the following with treaties. Sagauli, exactly. And for mains, it's all about questions on imperial policy, on the administrative consolidation of the empire. If you can really get your head around Lord Hastings, you understand how the modern map of British India was truly drawn.
Okay, so let's start with that first hurdle we mentioned. The name. The classic confusion. It trips people up constantly.
Oh, every single time. You see Hastings on an exam paper, and your brain immediately jumps to the first governor general, the impeachment trial.
Right, the guy from the 1770s and 80s. So let's put this to bed once and for all. Warren Hastings versus Lord Hastings. Lay it out for us.
Okay, Warren Hastings. He's the first one, the pioneer, governor general from 1772 to 1785. His defining policy, as we said, was the ring fence. He was essentially playing defense. His goal was to protect the company's existing territories, which was mainly Bengal at the time, from the big threats, the Marathas and Mysore.
He's the one who gets dragged back to England for that massive impeachment trial. He's the early days guy.
Exactly. He's the Regulating Act era. Now, jump forward almost 30 years. It's 1813. Lord Minto is heading home. The new man is Lord Hastings. His actual name was Francis Rawdon Hastings, and he was the Earl of Moira.
A totally different person.
Completely different guy. He's an aristocrat, a career military man, and his entire worldview is the polar opposite of a ring fence. He believes in what was called the forward policy. He believes in intervention, in projecting power, in sorting out the chaos beyond the company's borders.
So, super simple. Warren is defense. Lord Hastings is offense.
That's the perfect shorthand. And you have to understand the context he walks into. The source text is very clear that the condition of India in 1813 posed a serious threat to the British. He wasn't inheriting a peaceful garden party.
So let's paint that picture. What did that serious threat actually look like on the ground? What was keeping the British up at night?
It's what a UPSC mains question once beautifully called the specter of a fragmented polity. The central Mughal authority is a joke at this point. The emperor is basically a pensioner in Delhi with no real power.
Right. And the Marathas, who were supposed to be the successors to the Mughals.
They're a mess. They're consumed by internal rivalries and infighting. So you have this massive power vacuum, and into that vacuum rushes anarchy. The Pindaris are the most visible symptom of this, just raiding with impunity across central India.
And the Maratha chiefs themselves are still a threat.
Oh, for sure. The Peshwa in Pune is secretly trying to build an anti-British coalition. And then you have this other problem brewing up in the north, in the mountains. The Gurkhas of Nepal, they're on the move.
So Hastings looks at this chaotic map and thinks, I can't just sit in my palace in Calcutta and count our profits. This chaos will eventually consume us if we don't deal with it.
Precisely. His whole logic was that for the company's trade to be secure and profitable, you needed peace and order in the subcontinent. And to get peace and order in that environment, you first had to assert total dominance. His method was going to be war.
Okay, so let's start where he started. The war in the mountains. The Anglo-Nepalese War, or the Gurkha War. This kicks off pretty quickly, 1814 to 1816.
Yeah, he doesn't waste much time. And you have to understand Nepal's position. They'd been a powerful, unified state since about 1768.
And geography is everything here, right?
It's destiny. Nepal is landlocked. To their north, you have the massive Tibetan Plateau in China. Not much room for expansion there. But to their south and east, you have the incredibly fertile, wealthy plains of Bengal and Oudh, which are now controlled or influenced by the British.
So two expanding powers are inevitably going to collide.
It's like two tectonic plates grinding against each other. The friction point, according to the source, was the area around Gorakhpur and Basti. The British had acquired these districts from the Nawab of Oudh back in 1801.
So suddenly, the British East India Company's border is touching the Nepalese frontier.
Directly. And you get all these little disputes over which village belongs to whom, who has the right to collect revenue. But the real spark, the flashpoint, came in May 1814. The Gurkhas launched a raid on a British police post.
And this wasn't just a minor skirmish over some cattle.
No, this was a direct challenge. They killed 18 policemen and their officer. For Hastings, that was it. That was the casus belli, the justification for war. He immediately declared war on Nepal.
Now, you'd think, on paper, this would be a quick fight. You have the might of the British military machine with its discipline, its cannons, against a relatively small mountain kingdom. But the source makes a point of saying it wasn't that easy.
Not at all. The British got a bloody nose in the initial phase. Mountain warfare is a completely different animal. The British Army was designed for the flat plains of India, where you can line up in formation, fire volleys of musket fire, and use your cavalry effectively.
That playbook doesn't work in the Himalayas.
It's useless. The Gurkhas are, even today, legendary warriors for a reason. They knew the terrain intimately. They used guerrilla tactics. They were fighting for their homeland. And in 1814, they inflicted several humiliating defeats on the British. A famous British general, Gillespie, was killed trying to assault a fort. For a moment, it looked really bad for Hastings.
But the British are good at learning from their mistakes. They adapt.
They did. They brought in better commanders, most notably a general named Ochterlony, who was much more methodical. And on the Nepalese side, the key figure you absolutely have to remember is their general, Amar Singh Thapa.
That's a name to circle in your notes. Amar Singh Thapa.
A brilliant and incredibly brave commander.
Yeah.
He held out at the Fort Milan against overwhelming British numbers and firepower. But eventually, the British managed to cut off his supply lines. They isolated him. He was finally forced to surrender.
And his surrender basically breaks the back of the Nepalese resistance.
It does. And it leads directly to one of the most important treaties you'll ever encounter for the prelims exam. The Treaty of Sagauli. It was signed in March 1816.
Sagauli. S-A-G-A-U-L-I. Okay, I've definitely seen this in a match the following question. So let's break down the terms, because they love to ask tricky questions like, which of the following was not a term of the Treaty of Sagauli?
Right, let's list them out clearly. First, and most obviously, territorial concessions. The Gurkhas had to give up the Tarai region, that fertile strip of land at the foothills of the Himalayas.
That's a huge economic blow.
Massive. And even more strategically important, they had to cede the districts of Kumaon and Garhwal to the British.
Wait, Kumaon and Garhwal, that's basically the modern Indian state of Uttarakhand. That's a huge chunk of territory.
It is. And think what that means for the British. Their northern border is no longer the plains. Their border is now the high Himalayas. This gives them direct access, direct observation points towards Central Asia and Tibet. It fundamentally alters the geopolitics of the entire region.
Okay, so they take land. What else?
Second, they forced the Gurkhas to withdraw from Sikkim. This was clever because it created a buffer state, and more importantly, it boxed Nepal in. It prevented them from expanding further to the east.
So they're contained. Then comes the diplomatic stuff, I assume.
Yeah, the standard British playbook. Third, Nepal had to accept a British resident at their capital, Kathmandu.
Which is basically a high-level spy. A watchdog to make sure the king doesn't step out of line.
That's exactly what it is. And fourth, and this is a really crucial one, Nepal agreed not to employ any foreigners, other than the English, in their service.
Why did the British care so much about that? Who were they worried about?
The French. Always the French. Even though Napoleon had just been defeated at Waterloo in 1815, the British had this deep-seated paranoia that some Indian state or a neighbor like Nepal would hire French military officers to train their armies in the latest European tactics. This clause was designed to isolate Nepal from any rival European influence.
And there's a fun side effect of this war, isn't there? Something that we still see the legacy of today.
Absolutely. It's the birth of the Indian Hill Station. Because the British acquired all this new territory in the mountains, Kumaon, Garhwal, and the areas around what would become Simla, they suddenly had access to cool, temperate climates.
A relief from the brutal Indian summer heat.
A massive relief. They weren't biologically suited for it, so they started developing these places as health resorts, as summer getaways for their officials and their families. Simla, Mussoorie, Nainital, Raniket, all of these famous hill stations owe their existence to this war.
So the next time you're on vacation in Nainital, you can thank Lord Hastings and the Treaty of Sagauli.
And Lord Hastings got a personal thank you as well. For this victory, the crown promoted him. He was made the Marquis of Hastings, a nice little upgrade from being an earl.
Okay, so the northern border is now secure, push all the way to the Himalayas. But the heart of India, that central region, is still on fire with the Pindari problem. The source calls them a nuisance. That feels like the understatement of the century.
A nuisance is what you call a fly in your room. This
Okay.
was a plague. The Pindaris were these irregular bands of horsemen. They had no state, no king, no ideology. Their only profession was plunder.
And their origins are tied to the Marathas, right?
Yeah. Historically, yes. In the 18th century, they often acted as auxiliaries to the Maratha armies. You could think of them as, like, jackals following a tiger. The Maratha army would win the main battle, and the Pindaris would swarm in afterwards to loot the enemy's baggage train and raid the surrounding countryside.
But then the Marathas started to weaken. especially after their big defeat to the British in the Second Anglo-Maratha War in 1803.
Exactly. So suddenly, you have tens of thousands of unemployed, heavily armed mercenaries with no master. What do? They start raiding for themselves, and they were absolutely ruthless.
The source lists some of the places they were hitting.
All over. Mirzapur, Shahabad in the east, the Nizam's territories in the Deccan, the northern Sirkars on the coast. Their mobility was their greatest weapon. They could travel 50 or 60 miles a day, strike a town with terrifying speed, inflict horrible tortures to force people to reveal where they'd hidden their valuables, and then be gone before any army could respond.
It's basically making normal economic life impossible. You can't farm, you can't trade if you're constantly living in fear of these raids.
That was Hastings' justification. He said this was not a war of conquest. It was a police action on a massive scale. He declared a war of extermination against the Pindaris. And he didn't mess around.
He went big.
He went huge. The source gives specific numbers. A grand army of 113,000 men and 300 cannons. I mean, just pause and think about the logistics of assembling and supplying an army of that size in India in 1817. It's staggering.
Sounds like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut.
But the nut was spread out and moving very, very fast. The Pindaris would never stand and fight a pitched battle, so the strategy had to be one of encirclement, a giant pincer movement. Hastings himself commanded the northern force, coming down from the Gangetic Plains, while another general, Sir Thomas Hislop, commanded the southern force, moving up from the Deccan.
They were essentially trying to close a massive net around central India and trap the Pindaris inside.
That was the plan. And to understand how it ended, we need to talk about the main Pindari leaders because their events are very specific, very memorable, and perfect for retention. The three big names are Kareem Khan, Wasil Mohammad, and Chitu.
Okay, let's take them one by one. Kareem Khan.
Kareem Khan was the pragmatist. He was a leader. He saw this army of 113,000 men closing in, and he did the math. He realized the game was up. He surrendered to the British.
And what did they do with him?
They were pragmatic, too. Instead of imprisoning him, they gave him a small estate in Gorakhpur. He retired and became a respectable landlord. He took the golden handshake.
Smart man. Okay, next up, Wasil Mohammad.
Wasil Mohammad tried to run. He fled and took refuge with Daulat Rao Scindia, one of the powerful Maratha chiefs. But Scindia himself was under immense pressure from the British. Hastings basically told him, "You're either with us or against us. Hand him over."
And Scindia folded.
He had to. So he handed Wasil Mohammad over to the British. But Wasil Mohammad couldn't bear the humiliation of captivity. He managed to get his hands on some poison and committed suicide while in prison.
A much darker end. And that leaves us with the last one, Chitu. This is the story that everyone remembers.
This is the one that sounds like it's straight out of a Kipling story. Chitu was the most defiant of them all. He absolutely refused to surrender. He kept trying to evade the British columns, escaping into the dense jungles of central India.
He was on the run, alone, being hunted.
Exactly. The British cavalry was constantly on his trail, but in the end, it wasn't the British who got him. The forest has its own laws. The source states it very bluntly. He was killed by a tiger.
A tiger? You're kidding me.
Not at all. It's a recorded fact. A search party later found his horse and his severed head in the jungle. The greatest Pindari chief who had terrorized half of India ended up as lunch for a tiger. You can't make that up.
That is an incredible detail. So with their leaders gone.
The Pindari bands just disintegrated. By 1824, the Pindari menace was completely extinguished. Hastings had successfully restored order to central India.
But this is where this story gets really complicated and interesting, isn't it? Because this massive military operation, this hunt for the Pindaris, it wasn't just about them. It was the perfect pretext to deal with another much bigger problem.
Inevitably, it was a two-for-one deal. You see, the Maratha chiefs, the Peshwa, Scindia, Holkar, Bonsla, they were at best secretly sympathetic to the Pindaris. Many Pindaris were former retainers, and at worst they were actively harboring them, giving them shelter.
And deep down, the Marathas were just waiting for an opportunity. They were chafing under the subsidiary alliances Wellesley had forced on them. They wanted one last roll of the dice to regain their independence.
That's right. So the British campaign against the Pindaris naturally, and perhaps intentionally, bled into a final confrontation with the Marathas.
Which brings us to the Third Anglo-Maratha War, 1817 to 1818. This is it. This is the final showdown, the end of an era.
The final crush is a good way to think of it. And to really get this, you have to remember the Maratha Confederacy by this point was a shadow of its former self. That devastating defeat at the Third Battle of Panipat in 1761 had shattered their dream of a pan-Indian empire.
But they were still a force to be reckoned with.
Oh, absolutely. They were still dangerous, like a wounded tiger, you might say. Unpredictable and deadly.
So what was the direct catalyst? The source mentions the Peshwa's plots.
Right. The Peshwa, Bajirao II, is the central figure here. He was a complex character. Years earlier, in 1802, he had signed the Treaty of Bassein with the British, which basically sold off Maratha sovereignty to save his own position in an internal power struggle.
But he never really accepted it.
He hated it. He resented the British resident in his court at Poona, a very capable man named Mount Stuart Elphinstone. So Bajirao was secretly trying to weave together a grand anti-British alliance. He was sending emissaries to Holkar, to Scindia, to the Bonsal of Nagpur, trying to get them to rise up together.
So when Hastings moves this massive army into central India, ostensibly to hunt Pindaris, it forces the Marathas' hand.
Exactly. Hastings wasn't naive. He knew the Marathas were plotting. So he positioned his armies not just to trap the Pindaris, but also to checkmate every major Maratha capital. It was a strategic masterstroke. It basically called their bluff.
And the Peshwa took the bait.
He did. In November 1817, the Peshwa's forces attacked and burned down the British residency in Poona. A few days later, the Bonsal's army attacked the British contingent in Nagpur. The Holkar army also rose in rebellion. The war was on.
And how did this final grand alliance fare against the British?
It was a disaster for them. It was completely uncoordinated. The British, under ruthlessly efficient commanders, just dismantled them piece by piece. The Peshwa's main army was defeated at the Battle of Kirki. The Bonsal's forces were beaten at Siddhabaldi. Holkar's army was crushed at Mahidpur. It was a swift, total, comprehensive victory for the British.
So what did the political map of India look like after the dust settled? Because this is a moment of huge change.
Monumental change. First, the very office of the Peshwa, the symbolic head of the entire Maratha Confederacy, was abolished, just wiped off the map. Bajirao II surrendered, and the British pensioned him off. They sent him into exile far away, to a place called Bethur, near Kanpur in North India.
And that's a really important detail for later on, isn't it? Because his adopted son
is Nana Sahib, yes. And Nana Sahib's anger over the British eventually stopping that pension becomes one of the major causes of his leadership in the Great Revolt of 1857. It all connects back to this moment.
It always does. Okay, so the Peshwa's gone. What happened to all his territory?
The British annexed it directly. Most of the Peshwa's dominions were absorbed, and this is the key takeaway, to create the Bombay Presidency. If you look at an old map of British India, that giant swath of territory in the west colored red, much of that was formed out of the ashes of the Maratha Empire after this war.
So here's a great tagline for a mains answer. Lord Hastings was the maker of the Bombay Presidency.
Absolutely. Write that down. It's concise and it's accurate. As for the other Maratha chiefs, Scindia, Holkar, Bonsla, they were all forced to sign new, much harsher subsidiary treaties. They got to keep their thrones as princes, but they lost any semblance of real independence. They became vassal states of the British Empire.
Okay, I want to pause here and really dig into the why. This is prime material for a critically analyzed type of mains question. The source text gives a really detailed postmortem on why the Marathas failed so spectacularly. It wasn't just about British military superiority.
Not at all. It was a systemic failure. The text provides what we can break down into 6 key reasons.
Right, let's run through them. Number 1, leadership.
Or, more accurately, the complete lack of it. There was a leadership vacuum. The great visionary Maratha leaders of the 18th century, people like Mahaji Scindia and Nana Fadnavis, were long dead. Their successors, like Bajirao II and Daularao Scindia, were simply not in the same league. They were indecisive, often treacherous, and no match for shrewd British diplomat soldiers like Hastings and Elphinstone.
Okay, number 2, military weakness.
And this is nuance. It wasn't that they were bad soldiers. It was that their military organization was inferior. They'd tried to copy European-style infantry and artillery, but they hadn't fully mastered it. At the same time, they had abandoned their traditional strength, which was highly mobile guerrilla warfare.
So they were stuck in the middle, not good enough at the new way. And they'd forgotten the old way that made them so effective in the first place.
Precisely. They were trying to fight the British at their own game, and they just weren't as good at it. Their supply chains were a mess. Their command structure was chaotic.
Number 3, and this feels like the big one, disunity.
This is the fatal flaw. There was intense mutual bitterness and jealousy among the chiefs. Scindia and Holkar were bitter rivals. The Bansal in Nagpur didn't trust the Peshwa in Pune. The Gaikwar of Baroda just decided to stay out of the war entirely and sided with the British. They never, ever fought as a truly united front.
Which made the British policy of divide and rule incredibly easy.
They didn't even have to divide them. The Marathas were already divided. The British just had to exploit the existing cracks.
Okay, reason number 4. Economic and governance failure.
This is a harsh but important critique in the source. It notes that the Marathas, for all their military prowess, had left no positive impact on conquered territories. Their system was largely based on extracting tribute, the Shath and Sardesh Mukhi. They were often seen by the local populations not as rulers, but as plunderers.
So they never built up a base of popular support or loyalty in the territories they controlled.
Exactly. When the British came along offering a more stable, if exploitative system of governance, many people just shrugged. They were swapping one master for another. There was no great popular uprising to save the Maratha chiefs.
Right. Reason number 5. Diplomatic isolation.
Who were their allies? Who could they call on for help?
Nobody.
Nobody. Over the decades, they had bullied and raided pretty much every other power in India, the Rajputs, the Nizam of Hyderabad, the Kingdom of Mysore. So when their final showdown with the British came, no one was willing to lift a finger to help them. They were completely alone.
And finally, number 6. Intelligence failure.
They fundamentally underestimated their opponent. They failed to grasp the true nature of British power. They didn't understand the diplomatic and political strength of the East India Company, which was backed by the full might of the British state and the resources of the Industrial Revolution. They thought they were fighting the same company they fought 50 years ago. They were wrong.
So the Marathas are finally crushed, the Pindaris are eliminated, the Gurkhas are contained. Lord Hastings has, in the space of a few years, completely redrawn the political map and secured the empire. But he wasn't just a conqueror. The source is clear that he was also a builder, a consolidator.
That's the essential duality of Hastings. He was a brilliant imperialist. He understood that you win territory with the sword, but you hold it with good administration. He immediately pivoted from war to reform.
Okay, so let's get into segment 5, the reforms. And let's start with the most fundamental thing, land and money. The Ryotwari system.
This is a huge one for exams, especially for match the following questions. Now, Hastings didn't personally invent the Ryotwari system, but he was the governor-general who approved its large-scale implementation, particularly in the Madras presidency.
And the name we absolutely have to associate with Ryotwari is?
Sir Thomas Munro. M-U-N-R, Munro. He was the governor of Madras. If you see Ryotwari on a test, your brain should immediately connect it to Thomas Munro.
Okay, for a listener who might be new to these land revenue systems, can you give us the quick and dirty difference between Ryotwari and the zamindari system that Cornwallis had set up in Bengal?
Sure. Think of it this way. In Bengal, under the zamindari or permanent settlement, the British made a deal with a big landlord, the zamindar. The company collected a fixed amount of tax from the zamindar, and the zamindar was then free to collect whatever he could from the peasants on his land.
So there's a middleman.
A powerful middleman. In the Ryotwari system, there was no middleman. The government, the British state, dealt directly with the Ryot, which is just another word for the cultivator or the peasant. They would survey each individual field, assess its value, and fix the tax directly with the person farming it.
And the argument for this was that it was better for the peasant.
Right.
It cuts out the exploitative landlord.
That was the theory. The idea was to protect the peasant. In practice, however, the British government's tax demand was often extremely high and very rigid. So the peasant just swapped a local, often inefficient landlord for a much more efficient, bureaucratic, and unforgiving landlord, the colonial state. But Hastings supported it because he saw it as more efficient for revenue collection.
Okay, moving from land to law, what did he do in the judiciary and police?
He essentially built upon the existing Cornwallis Code, but he made some very practical changes. He saw that the court system was getting clogged up. There was a huge backlog of cases. So his solution was to increase the power and importance of Indian judicial officers, the munsifs. These were the Indian judges who presided over the lowest level of civil courts. Hastings realized that you couldn't run a vast justice system for millions of Indians using only a handful of expensive British judges. It was impractical. You needed to empower local officials who understood the local language and customs, so he expanded their jurisdiction. It's an early step towards the Indianization of the lower judiciary.
What about that classic principle of separation of powers between the executive and the judiciary?
This is a very interesting detail the source points out. Under Cornwallis, there was a rigid separation. The collector, who collected revenue, was separate from the magistrate, who administered justice. Hastings relaxed this. Under him, the district collector was often also given the powers of the district magistrate.
The collector magistrate. That's a figure that becomes central to Indian administration right up to the present day.
Yeah, it really does, and it tells you something about Hastings' priorities. Why combine the roles? Because it concentrates power. In a newly conquered and unsettled territory, you want one powerful figure who can both collect the tax and maintain law and order. It's about efficiency and control, not abstract principles of governance.
Now let's talk about an area where Hastings was surprisingly forward-thinking and liberal: education and the press.
Yes, this is the other side of his personality. On education, he actively encouraged the setting up of vernacular schools. But the headline fact, the one you need to remember, is his connection to the Hindu college, established in Calcutta in 1817.
Now, to be clear, the government didn't establish this college.
No, and that's a key distinction. It was founded by private individuals, by leading Indian social reformers like Raja Ram Mohan Roy and others, with the specific goal of providing a modern Western-style education in English and the sciences to Indians. But Lord Hastings gave it his official blessing. He became its patron. This shows he wasn't an opponent of Indian modernization.
And then there's the press. This is almost shocking for a colonial autocrat.
It really is. In 1799, Lord Wellesley had imposed strict censorship on all newspapers. He was paranoid about military secrets leaking out to the French. Hastings, feeling much more secure in his position, abolished that censorship. He believed a government should be strong enough to withstand public criticism.
And did this have a real impact?
A huge impact. It led to the birth of a vibrant Indian press. The source specifically mentions the Samachar Darpan, which was a Bengali weekly started in 1818 by missionaries in Serampore. This kind of publication simply couldn't have existed under the old rules.
And the expert insight here is to use this in a comparative way, in a mains answer.
Yes, absolutely. If you get a question on British press policy, you create a brilliant point by contrasting the liberal phase under Hastings with the later repressive phase under someone like Lord Lytton, who brought in the Vernacular Press Act in 1878 to gag the Indian newspapers. It shows you understand that British policy wasn't static. It swung back and forth like a pendulum.
Okay, fantastic. We've covered the wars, the reasons for failure, the reforms. Now let's put it all together for our simplified UPSC analysis. Let's imagine we're in the exam hall. Let's walk through how this material actually gets tested.
Let's do it. Pen and paper ready.
First up, the classic prelims trap. Chronology. I give you 3 events: suppression of the Pindaris, the Treaty of Sagauli, and the Third Anglo-Maratha War. Put them in the correct order.
Okay, the anchor point is always the First War. He deals with the northern threat first. So the Gurkha War starts in 1814. That war ends with the Treaty of Sagauli in 1816. So Sagauli is first.
Got it.
Only after the north is secure does he turn his full attention to central India. The massive campaign against the Pindaris kicks off in earnest around 1817, and that campaign directly triggers the Third Anglo-Maratha War, which also happens in 1817, 1818. So the Pindari and Maratha Wars are almost simultaneous, but the Pindari campaign starts just before the Maratha War officially breaks out.
So the correct order is Treaty of Sagauli, then Pindari suppression, then the Third Maratha War.
Exactly. Think of it as secure the mountains, then clean up the plains.
Perfect. Now for some rapid-fire fact-check questions, true or false style. Question 1. The Third Battle of Panipat, which fatally weakened the Marathas, occurred during the governorship of Lord Hastings.
False. 100% false. That's a classic distractor mixing up 2 different time periods. The Third Battle of Panipat was way back in 1761. That's more than 50 years before Hastings even arrived. However, the consequences of that battle created the weak, divided Maratha Confederacy that Hastings was able to so easily defeat.
So don't confuse the long-term cause with the immediate event.
Never.
Question 2. Lord Hastings personally established the Ryotwari system in the Madras presidency.
Ooh, that's a tricky one. I would say false. The wording is key. The man who really drove it and implemented it on the ground was Sir Thomas Munro. Hastings' role was to give it the official approval and backing from Calcutta. So if the question says introduced or implemented, you look for Munro. If it asks under whose governor-generalship, then the answer is Hastings.
Details matter. Okay, last one. Who was the patron of the Hindu college in Calcutta?
That would be Lord Hastings himself. Not the founder, but the patron. The founders were Indians like Ram Mohan Roy and Europeans like David Hare.
Excellent. Now for the big one, the mains perspective, you get a 15-mark question. Evaluate the administration of Lord Hastings. What is the ideal structure for that answer?
Okay, you need a balanced two-part structure. Your introduction should be sharp. Define him as the Governor-General who completed the transition of the company from one power among many to the undisputed paramount power. Use a phrase like, he completed the work started by Wellesley.
Okay, intro done. What about the body?
The body needs two main paragraphs. Body paragraph 1 is expansion and consolidation. Here you discuss the wars. Talk about how the Gurkha War secured the northern frontier, the Pindari campaign restored internal order, and the Maratha War established political supremacy. Use keywords like forward policy and assertion of paramountcy.
So war in the first part. What's in the second?
Body paragraph 2 is administration and reforms. This shows you have a nuanced view. He wasn't just a warmonger. Here, you discuss his internal policies. Talk about the Ryotwari system for revenue consolidation, the judicial reforms like empowering munsifs, and his liberal attitude towards education and the press.
And the conclusion.
Your conclusion ties it all together. You summarize by stating that Hastings was arguably the maker of the Bombay Presidency and the man who truly cemented the British Empire of India. He didn't just add territory, he built the administrative framework to rule it.
That is a rock-solid structure. Maker of the Bombay Presidency. I'm definitely remembering that one.
It's a great, punchy phrase that shows the examiner you understand the concrete geographical outcome of his policies.
We're nearing the end of our deep dive. What a decade. We've gone from the high passes of Nepal down to the jungles of central India and the court of the Peshwa in Pune.
It's a whirlwind. And to summarize it all, you can say that Lord Hastings finished the job that Wellesley had started. Wellesley had built the framework of empire with his subsidiary alliance system, but he left some dangerous loose ends. Hastings tied up those loose ends, he neutralized the Gurkhas, annihilated the Pindaris, and permanently crushed the Maratha challenge. When he left India in 1823, the British were no longer just the strongest power in India. They were, for all practical purposes, the only power in India.
The Mughal emperor was a figurehead, the Peshwa was gone, and every other major prince had a British resident in his court pulling the strings.
The game was over.
And that brings us perfectly to our final provocative thought for the day. We've talked about the suppression of the Pindaris. The narrative the British presented was very clear-cut. It was the forces of order and civilization destroying chaos and barbarism. Chitu being eaten by a tiger is the perfect, almost mythological ending to that story.
Right, it's a very neat good versus evil tale.
But I want you to consider the other side of Hastings' legacy. The Ryotwari system that he approved. On the surface, it sounds progressive.
Yeah.
It gets rid of the feudal zamindar and deals directly with the peasant. It sounds like liberation.
Go on.
But was it? Did it actually liberate the peasant? Or did it just swap one master for another? Did it replace the local, often arbitrary but sometimes flexible, landlord with a far more efficient, far more bureaucratic, and utterly unyielding master in the form of the colonial state?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? The Pindari might raid your village once every few years. It's terrifying, but it's an event. The Ryotwari tax collector, on the other hand, shows up every single harvest, demanding a fixed payment in cash, whether your crops failed due to drought or not, who at the end of the day represented the greater terror, the bandit with the sword or the bureaucrat with the ledger book.
Something to think about. All right, that's all the time we have. Before we sign off, one last round of reminders. If this deep dive was useful for you, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. It really is the best way to support what we do.
And if you're able, please consider our Patreon. We want to keep making more content just like this, and your support is what fuels it.
Don't forget to join the public Telegram channel for all those free notes and PYQs. And if you want the full premium library, just send a DM on that public channel to get access.
And please, like this video and drop a comment below. We genuinely want to know. What was the most surprising fact you learned today? Was it Chitu and the tiger? Or the details of the Ryotwari system?
Let us know. Until next time, keep learning and keep diving deep.
Take care, everyone.